So the wait is finally over. Nintendo have done it. They've finally unveiled the Nintendo Switch 2, and it's going to be bigger, more powerful, and more expensive than ever before. So grab yourself a cup of tea. My name's Leo. Let's talk about it. So it's been a few days since the Nintendo Direct event where the Switch 2 was shown off. So at the time of filming this video, pre-orders go live in 2 days on April the 8th. So as someone that's watched the Nintendo Direct event and owns the previous Switch, I've got some interesting opinions regarding the Switch 2 in terms of its design, slightly gimmicky features and extortionate pricing. And as always, I'd love to hear what your opinion is on the new Switch 2, so let me know in the comment section below. And if you do enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 10,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. Anyway, let's get on with it. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the new design. So from a distance, it does actually look pretty similar to the original Switch. I've got the Switch OLED here. It's got the screen with the Joy-Cons either side. Typical Switch design. But the first thing that's going to be quite apparent is the size difference. The new Switch 2 is actually quite a bit larger than the original Switch, which in my opinion is a good thing. I think since 2017 there has been a trend in slightly larger handheld devices. So for example, smartphones have got larger, and there's a new segment of device that didn't exist back when the original Switch came out. So here I've got my Steam Deck. So this class of device wasn't really a thing back in 2017. And as you can see, it's actually quite a bit larger than the Switch. And it seems to be the case that people don't mind the larger form factor when it comes to handheld devices. So I think when the Switch first released in 2017, Nintendo imagined that people would be putting it in their pockets. But that really hasn't been the case. I think most people that use a Switch put it in a case, put it in their backpack. So as long as it's backpack portable rather than pocket portable, people don't mind. So I do think the larger overall form factor is a good thing. And what comes with the larger form factor is a larger screen. So the new Switch 2 is going to have a 7.9-inch screen, which is hopefully going to feel significantly bigger than the Switch 1's display. So here we've got the Switch OLED. This actually has the slightly larger 7-inch display. But if you remember back with the original 2017 Switch, that console has a 6.3-inch display, so 7.9 is going to feel quite a bit bigger. So the next thing that's been upgraded on the Switch 2 are the Joy-Cons. So here we have the original Switch with its original Joy-Cons, and there were a number of problems with these Joy-Cons. Most people will have heard of Joy-Con drift, which plagued a number of Joy-Cons. Fortunately, I never experienced Joy-Con drift, but I did have another problem. My left Joy-Con was always a bit loose. So it's fair to say that the original Joy-Cons weren't the best. They did have their fair share of problems. So the Switch 2 has implemented a number of changes to its Joy-Cons, the first being the connection mechanism. So instead of sliding the Joy-Con in from the top, the Switch 2 now uses magnets. So initial testing of this mechanism from reviewers seems to be positive. As long as it doesn't wobble and it feels sturdy, then I'm happy. Another Joy-Con related issue that the Switch 2 addresses is the size. As we've mentioned, the Switch 2 is a larger device, which means that the Joy-Cons are going to be larger. So that was a gripe many people, including myself, had with the original Joy-Cons, was that they were quite small. So I am glad to see that the Switch 2 is going to have larger Joy-Cons. I think it'll definitely make them more comfortable. And a few other features to mention, it's going to have HD Rumble 2, which I assume is just going to be a more powerful haptic motor. So the new Joy-Con is going to come with an optical sensor, so in certain games you can use the Joy-Con like a mouse. I could definitely see this being a feature that never gets used, or if the right games get released on the Switch, it could be a really useful feature. So I think if they start releasing more PC titles for the Switch 2, then this may be a useful feature. For example, they're going to be releasing Civilization 7 on the Switch 2, which in my experience plays better with a mouse and keyboard, so it'll be interesting to see how well this feature is utilised. And I think it'll be interesting to see if the Switch 2 has mouse and keyboard support, because a lot of current gen consoles like PS5, Xbox Series X all have mouse and keyboard support. So I think it could be an interesting setup if you're using the Joy-Con as the mouse and then you plug in an external keyboard. I think that would be interesting, but realistically I don't think Nintendo are going to do that. Interestingly, Nintendo haven't even mentioned Joy-Con drift with the Nintendo Switch 2. With all the drama Joy-Con drift was causing for the original Joy-Cons, it would have been nice if Nintendo had come out and said, we're going to be putting Hall effect sticks in the new Joy-Cons, but they haven't done that. So I'm going to assume that Joy-Con drift is still going to be an issue. So I have actually noticed a few missed opportunities when it comes to the Switch 2's Joy-Cons. Let me know in the comment section if you agree. The first is that the triggers on the Joy-Cons are just buttons. I wish there were proper triggers. For example, whenever I use my Steam Deck, I do really appreciate the fact that the rear triggers are actually triggers. I'm able to half press, quarter press. There's a larger range of movements the trigger can sense compared with just a button. Also, I noticed the Switch 2 is quite thin, a similar form factor to the original Switch. I wish that they made the Joy-Cons a bit thicker. It definitely makes it more comfortable to hold. For example, the Steam Deck, as you can see, the edges of the device are quite thick and you can wrap your hands around them. I wish they did the same with the Switch 2. I think it would definitely make it more comfortable. So quickly covering the rest of the Switch 2's design. As you can see, the kickstand is slightly different. It actually looks slightly more flimsy than the one that comes on the Switch OLED. So we'll see how that holds up. I'm also glad to see that it still comes with a headphone jack. Another underrated feature that I don't think is being talked about enough is the fact that it now has two USB-C ports, one on the top and one on the bottom. And from what I've seen, the top of the device is going to look very similar to the original Switch. It's going to have volume rockers, power button, a fan, headphone jack and game cartridge slot. The only major difference is the addition of that extra USB port. So before we move on and talk about the performance of the Switch 2, let me know in the comments below what your opinion is on the design of the new Switch 2. Is it what you expected, or are there any improvements you would suggest? And if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. Let's carry on. So it's probably no surprise to anyone, but the Switch 2 is going to be significantly more powerful than the original Switch. I've seen some sources saying that it's almost 10 times more powerful. It's going to be powered by a new NVIDIA chip, but I don't think many details on this chip have been released. So I don't think we'll know the exact power of this chip until it's fully released. But I've seen some sources say that it produces about 1.7 teraflops, which puts it in line with the PlayStation 4 in terms of power. But I've seen other sources saying that it's about 10 times more powerful than the original Switch, which means it could be producing up to 3.9 teraflops, which puts it more in line with the Xbox Series S in terms of performance. It's also going to come with 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of faster storage. So what are my predictions on the performance of the Switch 2? Well, I think it's probably going to be closer to a PlayStation 4 in terms of raw performance, but it's going to have a lot of modern advantages. For example, the storage is going to be a lot quicker, so loading times are going to be a lot faster. It's also got a lot more RAM, which means more apps are going to be able to open at the same time. Textures are going to be higher resolution, as well as all of the advantages that come with a new NVIDIA chip. So the latest DLSS. It's also going to have ray tracing. So next, we're going to talk about the Switch 2's display, because there's a lot to be excited about, but I do have a few concerns. So as we've already mentioned, the Switch 2 has a 7.9 inch display, which is 0.9 inches larger than the Switch OLED, and it's over 1.5 inches larger than the original Switch's display. It's also a lot brighter and supports HDR, has variable refresh rate, higher resolution at 1080p, and even supports up to 120 Hz. So there is definitely a lot to be excited about. So my thoughts are, I think this display will look really good if you're upgrading from the original LCD Switch. But my problem is they did release the Switch OLED a couple of years back, which has an OLED display. My concern is, even though the Switch 2 has a brighter, higher refresh rate display, in many real world situations, I don't think it's going to look as good as the OLED. Because as someone that owns a lot of devices with a lot of different displays, OLED displays are just superior. They have better viewing angles, better contrast, better pixel response time than LCDs. So what I noticed is that all the tech reviewers that went to test the Switch 2 praised the Switch 2's display for being really bright. But you have to remember they were in a warehouse testing this device. I think there's a clip of MKBHD comparing the Switch OLED's display to the Switch 2's display. And yes, the Switch 2's display is brighter, but that's not how most people play their games. I rarely have it on max brightness. So my thoughts are, in a real world situation when you're playing both consoles at 60% brightness, I think the OLED is going to look better. Another concern I have is pixel response time. This might just be because I've looked at so many OLED displays. But interestingly, the first thing I noticed when using an original Switch after using this OLED for a period of time was actually the slow pixel response time of LCD displays. And this is something that I found very hard to ignore. So a display with a slow pixel response time will actually look very smeary. So I hope I'm proved wrong and the Switch 2 has a high pixel response time, but there is a chance, as it is an LCD, that it may have a slightly smearier image than the OLED Switch, which to me personally is quite distracting. So yeah, that is quite a controversial take on the Switch 2's display. So let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are. So I quickly want to touch on the battery life and storage of the Switch 2. So the Switch 2 is quoted to have a 5220 mAh battery, which is about 900 mAh larger than the Switch OLED's battery, but it has got a larger, less efficient LCD display, which means it's only quoted to last between 2 and 6 hours, which is a little bit disappointing. I do feel like they could have put a larger battery in the Switch 2 with its larger size, maybe a 6,000 or 7,000 milliamp hour battery, but I'm going to have to wait for some real world testing before I come to any conclusions. Now in terms of storage, the Switch 2 is going to have 256 gigabytes of storage, and it's going to be UFS 3.1, so it's going to have fairly quick read and write speeds. Now in my opinion, even though that is quite a lot more than the original Switch, I think that's probably the bare minimum that would be acceptable in 2025, because if you actually think about it, it's only a quarter of the storage of the new PS5 Slim and Xbox Series X, so I think I would have been disappointed if we were given any less. And I feel like half a terabyte, with how cheap storage has become, would have been a more reasonable storage capacity, because you need to remember that Switch 2 games are probably going to be quite a bit larger than Switch 1 games. So the Switch 2 has this new GameChat button. It's basically a small button with a C on it. They've basically created their own version of Discord so you can chat with people. You can also share your screen and see other people's gameplay on their screen. And if you buy this additional webcam, it'll overlay your face on top of your gameplay. But from the trailer, it does look low resolution and a bit laggy, so we're going to have to wait and see whether or not this is actually any good. So next I want to touch on the new dock. So it's a very similar concept to the original dock. You basically just put the Switch 2 into the dock and you'll be able to play it on your TV. The upgrade with this dock is it will now support up to 4K, but only at 60 frames per second. This new dock also has a fan, but if you look closely, the fan is just to cool the dock, not to cool the Switch. There's no thermal transfer between the actual chip in the Switch. That fan looks like it's purely designed to cool the components of the dock, not the Switch. You've got to remember the Switch has its own fan. Okay, so finally we're going to talk about the games. So like any new console release, there are some release titles. The main launch title for the Switch 2 is the new Mario Kart World, which is supposed to be an open world Mario Kart. So my first impressions, it looks like a Mario Kart game. It's probably going to be quite a lot of fun, but graphically it doesn't really look any better than Mario Kart 8. So I think the extra horsepower is going towards the extra players, so you can now race against twice as many people. The game that I'm personally most excited for is Dusk Bloods, which is a From Software game, the people that brought us Elden Ring, Dark Souls. And this looks like the closest thing we're going to get to a Bloodborne 2, so this does look very good. Like Bloodborne, it is annoying that it is a console exclusive. It would have been nice if it was released on other platforms. So I do hope the Switch 2 can run it at 60 frames per second, or at a solid 60 frames per second, because that's one of the main complaints with Bloodborne. It only runs at 30 frames per second. So I'm counting on you, Switch 2, you must run it at 60 frames per second, otherwise it's a wasted game. Alright, we're going to move on to the most controversial part of the Switch 2, and that is the pricing. So Nintendo have been the first to increase the price of games. Up until now, the standard price for a new video game has been $60, but Nintendo have now upped their price, so for a digital copy of a game it will now be $80, and for a physical copy $90, which is very expensive. And a lot of people, including myself, are not happy with that. I think that's just too much for a game. And the fact that Nintendo re-released the same game on multiple platforms. So a lot of the games that people are going to be buying for the Switch 2 or that are going to be sold on the Switch store are going to be games from the Switch, just with slight graphical enhancements. So for example, if you want to buy Breath of the Wild, it would probably be about $50 to $60 on the Nintendo Switch store. But if you want to get the Switch 2 version, which is probably going to be the better way of playing the game, because the game frankly runs crap on the original Switch, it's like 720p, 30 frames per second, you're going to have to shell out $80, which is a ridiculous price for a game that's like 10 years old. Nintendo have also proudly announced digital game cards. So these game cartridges will just contain a key that allows you to download the game from the store. The problem with this is, imagine in about 10 years time when the Switch store goes offline, then you won't be able to play these games even if you own the physical copy. So that is why a lot of people are upset by this, and I do agree it's not a very good idea. Now in terms of the price of the Switch 2 console itself, it's going to be $450 or $500 if you get it with the Mario Kart game. So that is a $150 increase over the original Switch. So let me know in the comment section what your opinion is on that price. Is it a fair price, or do you think it's too expensive? So anyway, that's going to wrap this video up. Let me know in the comments section below what your opinion is on the Switch 2 and whether or not you're going to be picking one up. And if you found this video useful, be sure to drop us a like and consider subscribing. We're on the road to 10,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. And I'll see everyone in my next video.